Let's take a look at configuring InDesign to give you the best possible document settings. And that's an important note. You should configure your document settings with no documents open. If you're on the PC, the preferences are all located under the Edit menu at the very bottom. Since I'm currently on a Mac, I'll go to InDesign, Preferences, Units and Increments. And in Units and Increments, and in my travels with Adobe and teaching across North America, I found that most people are on inches. So I'm changing horizontal and vertical to inches. The only places I know of that are still using picas and points are companies that were using typesetting in the Wayback Machine back in the early 80s or late 70s, or some newspapers do picas and points in one direction and inches in the other. But if you happen to be a Canadian or European, or whatever unit of measure you'd like, you could choose centimeters or millimeters, whatever's most comfortable for you. I prefer inches, so that's where we'll go. Since I'm here, I'm going to set size and leading to 1, baseline shift to 1, and kerning and tracking to 10. If you've already built InDesign documents, they will pick up the factory defaults. And what these three numbers do is they make it so that when you use the keyboard shortcut Command-Shift-Period to make your text bigger, or on Windows Control-Shift-Period to make your text bigger, instead of increasing the type 2 points at a time, which is too big for copy fitting, it'll now go 1 at a time. Illustrator has the same preference, and I change them immediately before I start working. Photoshop, unfortunately, will always only go 2 at a time because they don't have this setting yet. So, a side note, Command-Shift, comma, which is the less than key, comma and less than are the same key on your keyboard, or Control-Shift, comma, will make your text smaller. And I often show that off when I'm demonstrating how to size type and select your font and so on. The second thing I'm going to change is display performance. In display performance, vector graphics, or placed Illustrator files, images that are made up of points instead of pixels, images that are resolution independent and scalable, will look far better if you slide this hard right to high resolution. But before I do, I'm going to leave it on the default and show you why I changed these next two settings. So I'll click OK, and I'll open the San Francisco Guide document. In this document, you'll notice that I have an AI file here. In fact, the link icon in the upper left corner will show me it's sfcityline.ai. And if I zoom in with Command plus or Control plus, you can see it looks pretty rough and jagged. There are two types of preferences in Adobe applications, specifically in InDesign. Global, which means if you change the setting, it affects opened and unopened documents, or document specific. The units and increments is document specific, so you have to set that with no documents open to get it to affect all new files. If you changed it to inches with only one file open, your new documents would still be picas and points, so make sure nothing's open for most of these. But under Edit, Preferences Display Performance on Windows, or InDesign Preferences Display Performance on the Mac, you could slide vector graphics to high resolution, and this will give you a much sharper display for any vector, things that are EPS that were drawn on your computer from scratch. EPS files often also fall into this category. One other note, if I zoom out with Command minus or Control minus, or View Zoom Out, you'll notice at a certain zoom level, and I'm going to go even smaller, if I wheel down with my mouse, the text on this second spread is showing me a gray blob instead of the actual characters. That's another setting I change in display performance. And both of these are global, so it does not matter if a document is open or not. So back to Edit Preferences Display Performance or InDesign Preferences Display Performance. And I'm going to set my Greek type below to 0. Never Greek, never show me a gray blob. When I click OK, now, no matter how far out I zoom, I will always see some semblance of my character. And I'll go back to View, Fit Spread in Windows since this is a facing page document. This next setting is also global. And please tell a friend. This was added in InDesign CS2, but most people don't even know it's built in. Under the Edit menu is Spelling and Dynamic Spelling. I love this. It gives me the red squiggles under typos. And now you can see that Noe Valley, it doesn't recognize the word Noe. So I can double-click to get inside the box and right-click on Noe, or if you're on a Mac laptop with a trackpad and you don't have a right-click, you can use Control-click. Not the Command key, but the Control key, a key we almost never touch as a Mac user. But from here, I can directly add Noe to the user dictionary, or I can choose a proper replacement if this was a misspelled word. I'm not going to do either for the moment, but now in all of your documents, if I page down or wheel down, anywhere there's a questionable word, you'll get the red squiggles, and you won't always have to remember to run spell check. The third preference I'm going to change, I'll show you in the Pages panel. And in fact, before I even do that, for Mac users only, I love to work in InDesign CS4 and newer, and even in Photoshop and Illustrator CS4 and newer, with the application frame on. If I turn application frame on, when I click the desktop, I could still see my panels and toolbar. When I click back on InDesign, I'm back to my document and I could see my Pages panel. But this will let me maximize my screen to get that blue desktop out of the way. Now this next setting used to be a preference in the Pages panel menu. The panel menu is the four little lines with the down arrow, and it used to be under Panel Options, but they've moved it in InDesign CS6. It's now under View Pages and horizontally. This should stay on forever unless you switch workspaces, and I'll show you what I mean. If I choose View Pages horizontally, I can stretch the Pages panel to make it wider and fit more, or make it really thin and not lose any of my layout or color previews of these pages. If I switch to my favorite typography workspace and I click the Pages panel, I've lost that view setting. And if I try to reduce the width, it's okay for a facing page layout, but when I make it wider, I'm just wasting all this space. It's not resorting the pages across and then down. So if I go to the panel menu again, View Pages horizontally, now I can fit a lot more. In fact, this is easier to see for single-page documents. If I make a new document with facing pages off, I can type 20 pages, for example. And here, as I make this thinner, I fit a lot in the panel, and I could even see all 20 pages when it's wider. If I were to put it back to the out-of-the-box or factory setting of vertically, I waste all this territory and I have to scroll to get to my pages. So before you start working, it helps to set that to horizontally. I really wish that was on by default. It makes so much more sense to me. Now, these last two settings have to be done with no documents open. I'll close this document and the one behind it. I haven't changed anything, so I'll click Don't Save. And I'm not a big fan of welcome screens, although I know people who love to use them to open recent documents. So I'm going to hit Don't Show Again. I do recommend you check out local InDesign user groups in your area and InDesign Exchange, where people share scripts and automation features, or even plugins, ways to extend the functionality of InDesign for things that it doesn't do out of the box. If you do turn off the welcome screen and close it, you can always get it back under the Help menu. But the last two settings I want to change before I begin working in InDesign is under View, Extras, Show Text Threads. If you turn on text threads with no documents open, then now if I open Recent and open that San Francisco guide, and I scroll down and click with my selection tool on a text box, you could see the threaded text, the out port at the bottom of this first text box, linking to the in port of this next Fillmore text box. then going from Fillmore, the outport, to colonization, the import. If I deselect, they don't show up, but it helps you really to see where your text is threading or pouring into. In fact, if I double-click to get inside this Borders text box and click 4 times always selects a paragraph, and press Delete, you could see the threading, how it pulled Fillmore up to that first box. I'll undo that. And one final setting I'm going to change with no documents open. I'll close this and go to Paragraph Styles. In Paragraph Styles, I'm going to double-click on Basic Paragraph. And when I double-click on Basic Paragraph, InDesign has always had, in my opinion, a far superior optical kerning engine. Kerning is the space between a pair of characters, 2 characters. The word tracking is a good example. Someone who's good at kerning, adjusting the space between a pair of characters, might pull the letter R a little bit under the top of the T to make the letter spacing look more proportional. Well, InDesign can do that on everything out of the box, and if you choose optical, InDesign's own kerning engine kicks in to go above and beyond the kerning pairs, the pairs for letter spacing built by the font vendor. And if you get cheap fonts or free fonts, often they have very few good kerning pairs. The word was is a prime example. The gap between the W and A can look too big, and if it looks too big, you might read the letter W and the word as. But if optical kerning is on, it will tuck that A under the arc of the W and give you one word that is easier for the brain to read. So optical kerning makes better letter spacing. Kerning is the space between a pair of characters, just 2 characters, and I always like it on. So by setting this in the Paragraph Style panel of Basic Paragraph with nothing open, all new documents will pick up those settings. So if I choose File, New Document, and I just click OK on the default, and with my Type tool I draw a text box and type the word was, I can hit Command plus or Control plus to zoom in, or from your View menu zoom in. And if I double click on this word, you'll see optical kerning is on. If I click between the W and the A, InDesign tucked those 2 letters minus 68 thousandths of an M space closer together. Between the A and the S, positive 10. If I change the font to anything else, you'll notice between the W and the A now, minus 21, and between the A and the S, minus 6. It just does a beautiful job. And let's do one more word, and I'll show you that keyboard shortcut for sizing your text. If I even do a different font for the word finally, and a different size, I'll make this 20 points. This word is 12. This word is 20. If I select all with Edit, Select All, and hit Command Shift period, this is now 13, and this is 21. On the PC, that's Control Shift period. If I do Command A to select all again, and hit Control Shift period again, each time I hit Control Shift period or Command Shift period, it's getting bigger 1 point at a time. Command Shift comma or Control Shift comma gets smaller 1 point at a time. And that even works in Microsoft Office. In Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, those 2 shortcuts will work, so I love them. They move in bigger increments in the preset sizes in Microsoft programs, but I love that I can tell this to move 1 at a time instead of the default 2 at a time. And all of these settings that we just configured will be available for all new documents from here on out. So with no documents open, switch your display performance preferences to Greek type below to 0, vector to high resolution. Switch your units and increments to inches, and your size and leading, baseline shift, and kerning and tracking. Make sure Edit, Spelling, Dynamic Spelling is on. Make sure under View Extras, it says Hide Text Threads. If it says Hide, they're already showing. So I don't want to choose that again. I'm just checking that it's on. And finally, I adjusted my basic paragraph style so I get better letter spacing with optical kerning on by double-clicking and choosing optical in basic character formats. And I guess that wasn't finally. The very last setting we changed is in the Pages panel menu, View Pages horizontally. And that should make InDesign much more comfortable and much more responsive for how I like to work.